the world blew up in 2008. The world is now entirely about the management of the debts. That is everything now. And there are two ways for that to happen. If we didn't do quantitative easing in 2008, 9, 10, 11, all of that stuff, the world would have burnt and destroyed in the manner that you thought.
Raoul Pal is an ex-hedge fund manager based in London, working for Goldman Sachs and more recently as co-manager of GLG's Macro Investor. Today, Raoul writes the Global Macro Investor newsletter and is co-founder at Real Vision, a financial market and global macro video streaming service. He believes the world is buying time for GDP growth to come back. In this video, he explains why he believes that is not sustainable long term. And make sure you stay till the end of the video, where Raoul tells us his predictions for Bitcoin and how you might be able to profit from it.
What we chose was a glide path. The crash is ongoing, but you're buying time for GDP growth to come back, right? Our problem is if you're in debt and you don't have enough income, i.e. your income's not growing enough to service your debts, you get into a problem. So what we've been doing is monetizing those interest payments on the debt, which is basically using a credit card to pay off your credit card, or using your credit card to pay off your mortgage. Okay, that's not sustainable. But what you're hoping is that eventually your income goes up. And there are ways to do that. And the big issue here is demographics.
Raoul suggests issuing more money to pay for your debts, i.e. printing money by central banks, leads to hyperinflation and an eventual devaluation of currencies.
Hyperinflation is when you issue more money to pay your debts, and it comes in an endless cycle because you're not generating GDP growth, so you just keep printing money. So an excess of anything, in extremis, everything becomes worthless. So if you're thirsty and you've come out of the desert and somebody gives you a bottle of water, you'll pay pretty much anything for it. If somebody's there with 1 million bottles of water, what's a bottle worth to you? Almost nothing. Once you've had the first one, right? So anything in excess supply, it's just supply and demand. Too much supply of currency, the value goes down. Okay, so therefore, all of your productivity as a human is devalued as well, because you can't buy anything. So you end up having to ignore currency and barter. And we've seen that in many places as well, because the value exchange of a currency in the middle, because it falls so fast in value, it's a nightmare to deal with. And it's a total destruction of wealth, except those who own assets.
Wages and the cost of living are very much on people's minds at the moment, because as a currency buys you less and less each year, your wages need to go up to match the inflation in order to buy the goods and services you need. Raoul goes on to explain what's happened to real wages.
Real wages have not gone up versus prices. I don't know what peak wages were, but let's say they were 6% last year, year-on-year wage growth, but peak prices were 9%. So people actually got poorer, which is why we've got a recession going on, because everybody lost purchasing power versus just basic goods. By every indicator I've got, we're in a recession already. And it will become more abundantly clear. Real wages for everybody have actually gone negative, massively negative, which is why everybody's feeling the pinch.
So what is the solution to the recession? And how can we achieve economic growth? Raoul explains that there are 3 factors involved.
Economic growth is driven by 3 factors and 3 factors only at long-term level, aside from just the normal business cycle ups and downs. Population growth. The more population you have, the more your economy has activity. Population growth. Well, population shrinking the entire Western world. The only way of offsetting that is immigration. There is less of a desire to have immigration than there was maybe 20 years ago. So most countries have started to restrict immigration. So there's no way of solving the population side. The next part of the magic formula is productivity. That's how much output each of us can generate for the economy, and that becomes more efficient. Problem is, it seems to be a function of demographics too, and productivity has been declining since the 70s. Well, actually since the 50s. So productivity is going down. The population is shrinking over time. So the answer was debt. The answer all the way through this equation from these people who were sold the American dream back in the 1950s, the baby boomers. They're listening to Elvis Presley, getting into the Beatles. They're like, let's go, the American dream, I'm going to get rich. But as we pointed out, their wages never went up. But because there were so many of these people, they competed for houses, and houses went up. They invested in the stock market went up. Everything, all assets got more expensive because of their demand. So they did the rational thing, which is I'm just going to borrow money. And the difference between the rise of the assets and their wages is essentially what the debt was. The debt side of the equation is what the government's done too, because GDP is declining. The trend rate of GDP keeps going down. Leverage gives the illusion of growth, but obviously it has a payback later. And this is the payback we've got now. The leverage that the baby boomers took on, their governments took on, and the corporations took on for all of this issue is what we're dealing with now. So the difference is debt. And that was okay. Although we were all starting to look at this saying, whoa, this is now getting absurdly debt laden. The government's 100% of debt. The private sector's 100% of debt. Households are 100% of GDP in debt. It's like, whoa, this is out of control. Then 2008 comes along. And that is the debt crisis. I mean, every fucking bank blew up. I mean, everything blew up. It was a complete, total collapse. And that rolled on into Europe in 2012 when the governments, Spain, Italy, etc., blew up. My view is 2008 was the uncovering that the geyser is not a geyser, it's a volcano. They see it and it's like the holy shit moment. So they did something unparalleled. The Great Reset happened. They reset all interest rates to zero. I had not realized this until recently. That was the debt jubilee. We will reset all payments to zero because we understand. So the blow up happens, but it's now disguised. And the disguise is the important next part of the story. Because what they did is somewhere around 2012, I believe, G7 made the agreement, learnt from the Japanese. When your government debt is 100% of GDP, this is the really important point of the Everything Code. When your government debt is 100% of GDP, and your private sector debt is, for easy maths, call it 100% of GDP in debt. Okay, now interest rates, let's say they're 2% for easy numbers. So when the government has to pay, well, economic growth is what pays for debt, right? It's the earnings of the economy. So if economic growth is growing at 2% and interest rates are at 2%, then the government, which is 100% of GDP in debt, uses all economic growth to pay the interest. So then the private sector has got to pay its 2%. And that means the economy would contract and this would continue in perpetuity.
With interest rates on the rise, as central banks try to curb the inflation caused by the money printing of the last decade, where does the extra money needed to pay the shortfall in interest payments come from?
There's a level of economic growth that needs to service the interest payments. But if everybody's interest payments are too high, the answer is firstly to have the interest rate as low as possible, which is why the Japanese have a much lower natural rate of interest than everybody else, because they're 260% of GDP in debt. This is why we're going to have a recession and we're going to cut rates back down to zero. It's impossible to work. So this is the thing is, once all of these governments hit 100%, then you either blow up the private sector, the banking sector, corporates, because there's not enough income to service that level of debt, because GDP growth keeps declining. In 2008, all interest rates went to zero. Every government refinanced itself at zero. And most of the debt for all governments is in the 3 to 5 year sector. And what happens is every time you service the debt, you need to get the interest rates back down again. You end up having a recession. You get this very cyclical phenomena. And one of the things we do is when the business cycle is too hot and inflation starts rising, central banks tend to raise interest rates. That tends to bring down economic activity. I think even without a central bank, interest rates would rise naturally, because I think the free market can set interest rates without a central bank. And then the economy slows down again and we see this endless cycle.
So what should people be thinking about doing over the coming years to take advantage of these debt cycles?
My hypothesis is that, okay, this is very observable. I think it's going to last, this relationship between assets and the central bank balance sheet because of the mechanism of debasement of currency. And I can forecast out what the business cycle looks like. And I also know the amount of interest payments that need to be made because they happened 3.5 years ago. And I can see how far the balance sheet's going to expand. So the balance sheet right now is what, $6.5 trillion. And it looks like it will get $7 trillion or so. And it looks like it will get to $12 to $14 trillion by the end of 2025. That puts asset prices massively higher than here, hugely higher. So we're looking at more than a doubling of the NASDAQ from here. We're looking at another gigantic crypto run. That's into 2025. So we're seeing huge moves that just come from the debasement.
What role will crypto play in this? And what is the outlook for crypto over the coming years as asset prices increase?
If you own crypto or technology, you will outperform this entire thing. Now, if you're not wealthy enough to buy, set up a brokerage account doing that because it's complicated for you, you can do it with crypto for no money. And you'll participate not only in the trend of debasement, so you're not getting left behind, because if you're just getting an income and you're not buying any assets, you're truly getting behind. Your 401k may look like the S&P 500. That's not making you any richer. Just buy technology or buy crypto, and those are the only two assets that outperform the central bank balance sheet. So there's your solve at a personal level. With Bitcoin, I treat it as an asset that is going to protect my long-term wealth. And that sounds crazy when it goes up and down like it does, right? And you've just gone through that full first cycle and you're like, oh. But what you'll find is the low is higher than the last time it hit the bottom. And then the next low will be higher and each high is higher. Oh, it's in an uptrend. So I just don't need to sweat about the ups and downs. What I should do is just accumulate every time it's in a down cycle. Why? Well, because the down cycle is signifying that economic contraction is happening and that the world is slowing down and money's being taken out of the system, quantitative tightening, which is the opposite process, and assets fall. And interest rates are going up, so your disposable income's going down because your wages aren't going up enough and the interest rates have gone up more. So it's at that point, the outcome. Is if economic activity is going to slow down, the next year, in a year's time, they're going to be printing money or cutting rates because it's very cyclical for the phenomena of this rolling of this debt. So therefore, you should be buying more at these points because then you've got the next upside cycle to come.
For Raoul, the future debt cycles are clear, with the rolling of massive global debt levels through the expansion of central bank balance sheets via money printing, followed by inflation, followed by interest rate rises, leading to recession and the resetting of interest rates to low levels to issue more money to pay for the debt. And so Raoul is using Bitcoin as an asset to protect his long-term wealth. This is in no way financial advice, and I am not a financial advisor. You need to do a lot of research and talk to a professional about your particular financial situation and what investments might be right for you. If you enjoyed the content, please give this video a like as it helps me get the videos out to more people on YouTube. Also, make sure you're subscribed to the channel and hit the notification bell so you know when I upload new content to help keep you informed about the financial markets and the world of Bitcoin and crypto. Until next time, happy investing.